Good afternoon. We will at this time call to order the June 26, 2024 Diversion Authority Land Management Committee to order. Could I get a roll call, please?
Mrs. Sherlin.
Here.
Mr. Stamnus.
Here.
Ms. Derrick.
Here.
Mr. Campbell. Mr. Borboom.
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson. Mr. Olson.
Here.
Mr. Breitling. Ms. Maggio.
Here.
Ms. Preston. Mr. Dimmerman.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You have had an opportunity to review the previous minutes from April 23rd. Are there any additions, corrections, or a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The motion carries. You have in front of you the order of the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to that or a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Okay.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. The order of the agenda is approved. Moving right along to item number 4, excess land recommendations. Jody.
Yes, so, oh, look, I've already failed Peggy. She let me be in charge of the agenda again. So you'll see before you, we're going to go through a couple of recommendations. The last one that pertains to the rail corridor, we're going to have some conversation about direction that the Lands Committee would like to provide to me. So the first couple are a little bit simpler. The first one is OIN 9191Y. You can see that it is 69 acres. Let me scroll down to the map for you real quick. So it's just north of SE3. We did purchase this property back in 2015 for $5,740 per acre. We are recommending the sale of this at $8,500 per acre, just due to its odd shape. There is some TCE, it's not illustrated on this map, that abuts I-29, so fairly significant amount, about 3.43 acres of that TCE on here. The reason that we're recommending this to go out for sale right now is we're going to have an access issue to this parcel once SE3 goes under construction, which will be sometime next year. Right now, the property owner is able to get to it from a couple of different spots, but once that happens, we won't be able to get them out there. The previous property owner has expressed interest to us in purchasing the property. The price of the property has not been conveyed to him at this point in time, so whether or not he'll continue to be interested after learning that's gone up $3,000 an acre, I cannot guarantee. If he does purchase it, this is his residence right here, kind of in the middle of the parcel. He will have direct access to it and we won't have any problems. If he doesn't purchase it for whatever reason, we will have to invest approximately $15,000 and put an approach with a culvert right along 174th Avenue Southeast. So at this point in time, we are recommending that this go up through the excess lands policy, and with any hope at all, the previous property owner will purchase this to just kind of avoid any access issues that we're having out here.
So are there any considerations in the price since it's located along I-29?
There were not any considerations as far as being transitional and developable. Is that what you're trying to say? Like a transition value? No, typically in this area for tillable land, what we're seeing is that it's going to be around the $10,000 an acre, but because there's going to be an access issue to this one, you know, there's going to be limited development potential on it. So, but open to any suggestions that you guys might have.
Questions or comments? Any questions for Joe?
Chair Sherlin.
Yes, Commissioner Manjo.
Thank you. Because there seems to be about $15,000 in expenses that we'd have to spend if the landowner adjacent doesn't purchase, has there been discussion about discounting the price for the buyback by $15,000 to him?
Commissioner Mojo, we haven't, only because the previous property owner has access. You can't see in this map, but it's kind of right in here. It's in the trees. It'd be if if the previous property owner doesn't purchase it and it goes to public sale or to a neighboring property owner, we would need to put in a culvert and an access point along this road. There's an area that's right up here in the corner that the Corps tried to convince us was an access point, but Eric went out there, took some lovely pictures, and a golf cart can get across it, maybe a truck, but they do have a stake in there, so they're obviously not using that at this point in time. And so if we sell it to anybody else other than the previous property owner, they'd have to trespass to get over. It kind of lops over this a little bit, not too much, and maybe they could work something out, but really we'd have to kind of step in. And what we tend to do, Commissioner Mojo, just because, every time we do something, we have to get an extra permit, is we tend to put in the agreement that we would pay for it, and or at the end, we could discount the price to the next property owner if it's not the neighboring or the previous property owner of that $15,000. And then we kind of wash our hands of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comment or motion?
I have them as one motion unless you want to take them separately.
We can take them together, that's fine.
I just have these two. So this OIN 9741Y, it is the 9.49 acres. You can see on your memo, we did purchase it in October 2023, so not that long ago. We are proposing, again, $8,500 an acre as a sale price. I'm going to scroll down to the map just to illustrate this to you. So this is OIN 9741Y. It's this little triangle here. Again, there's going to be a bit of an access issue here. I did talk to Chris Bachiegar. I think he's here somewhere hiding, yes, about this. And this is really hoping that one of the neighboring property owners purchases it. We do have at least out to one of the neighboring property owners right now. This would help us with guaranteeing access through this road and having to work through the MOU with the township and or with the contractor to guarantee that access remains along this road just to get to this triangle. So if we can sell it either to the Flaytons or to the Lohbergs, again, it will help mitigate additional expenses to the project, somewhere in the range of $50,000 to $100,000. So,
Questions for Jody on this one? Or a motion?
I'll make the motion. I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? And the motion is to approve
The recommendation.
the recommendation to dispose of the excess land.
Yeah,
Okay,
that would be my motion.
that's okay. That's great. So any other comments, discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Charlene,
Yes.
Mr. Stamnes,
Yes.
Ms. Derrick,
Yes.
Mr. Borboom,
Yes.
Mr. Olson,
Yes.
Ms. Mongeau,
Yes.
Ms. Preston? Yes. Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
And that is everyone.
Thank you. Okay, move on to the final one.
So this one's going to take a little bit more thought and discussion on it. So bringing it forward to you today just to have your input. This is part of the rail corridor. So just to give you an update on the other portions of the rail corridor that you've approved for excess land sale. This is OIN 7247. This is the northernmost portion. This is Horace up here. Everybody that is highlighted green has responded that they would like to purchase the portion of that parcel. So all of these we can just assume are sold. We have been in conversations with our legal counsel. It's going to take a little bit of effort for us to kind of get through those closings so you can anticipate a fairly long closing process because we're going to have to get updated legal descriptions to align with the property. And I know Eric and I were talking earlier today, there might be some replatting that will occur with the city of Horace. So this is a positive thing. I'm also working with Peggy and Chris. We need to get a contractor out there to remove the ballast. And then Chris and I will be working with the Department of Environmental Quality on any environmental concerns that are along any of these portions of the corridor. So again, just expect a little bit of a process as we go through these, but all these property owners did reach out to us. They've all agreed to purchase it at the 50 cents per square foot. 9248 has not reached out to us yet. They have reached out to us in the past, so we're going to go ahead and do a courtesy call to them, make sure that they're still interested in purchasing this small portion here. And then for the 7249, it's a little tough to see, but again, everything in green, they have said yes, they would like to purchase it. And yellow, they're thinking about it still, or they've said no. So we only have 3. And then additionally, this property owner down here was interested in purchasing it. So what we'll do is we'll go right to the middle of the right of way. So each of the property owners will get that 50 feet because it's a 100-foot rail corridor. So just as a little update of kind of where we're at. It's a laborious process because if you can just imagine, all of these property owners have called or emailed us with many questions. So between myself and Eric, we've been trying to tag team this, answer the questions about the process. So it's good to kind of temper how we're selling the corridor, not selling it all at once, just so that our team can kind of be responsive and appropriate with all the property owners as they come back with questions for us. So,
Question.
yes, sir.
So is it at our expense to do the legal work, the survey work, set the pins?
Yeah, so it's a good question. In this particular circumstance, we will complete all of the survey work and the legal work at our own expense. And that's mainly because it would be pretty cumbersome for the property owners, plus they'd have to go, to one of the surveying crews and get queue, and we employ most of them in town, so it's a little bit more of an expedited process. We've already had this, a surveyor out here, and we already have a legal description for this entire corridor. So as we work the process, we may still just utilize them to go out there and be able to do this. It'll just be a little quicker for them to be able to go down there. And so again, typically it can take anywhere from 2 to 6 months to close on a property. I would expect this to be closer to that 6-month period. But again, we're going to try to, before we close, get out there and remove all the ballast, so all the rock that was left out on site, because that's a requirement of our agreement with BNSF that all of that ballast gets removed, and with DEQ. And so we'll try to meet all of our obligations, with the exception of the environmental concerns. That's going to take us a little bit longer to work through, but there aren't too many. There's less than we anticipated, primarily because it wasn't a heavily used corridor.
So we know what all the environmental
We do.
concerns are.
We do. So what we're going to talk about a little bit today is we're going to talk about this SE 2334B, if I said that right, the 7234B. This 7234A, this is the Horace elevator parcel. So this blue and purple is the elevator parcel. It's not what we're recommending for sale today. We're recommending the yellow and the red. I had this map created so that it's easier for us to kind of look at what is happening out here as far as price differentials through appraisals and estimates. So when we purchased this yellow portion from BNSF, they sold it to us at $2.76 per square foot. And then when we purchased this portion that's in red, that was a little over $6 per square foot. This was based off BNSF's appraisal. Whether you agree with the appraisal or not, you don't really get to disagree with BNSF. So we accepted it for what it was, and this is essentially what we did pay for this area. This area up in here, we know we paid a premium for. We did have this appraised. The entire property, including this A portion, and then out to the street, so that would be all the way over to Main Street, this entire property appraised at a little over $1 million. The area in the blue, per the appraisal, appraised at $8.15 per square foot. So please, there's a huge difference between the $2.76 and the $8.15 per square foot in this area. Some of this is going to have to do with some of the zoning. And so let me scroll down to the map. And if you want to see these, I did print them off. I apologize. They're just over here in the corner. So if you want one in front of you instead of on the screen, because that's easier to see, let us know. We can get those to you. But we do have different zoning that's occurring in here, and Eric might be able to explain it a little bit better than I can. But essentially what it looks like is happening is this is Old Town. If I'm saying that right, Eric, this is Old Town zoning. I might have him come up here because he looked at this for me as far as the zoning has occurred. And this is a government zoning. There's Old Town zoning in here. So when you start layering everything on top of each other, you're kind of throwing spaghetti at a wall to see kind of what the price should be. Probably should be higher than the 50 cents per square foot that we have in the memo. But does that mean that it's going to be, $8 a square foot or $2 a square foot, kind of where do we see that? So I'll let Eric speak on the zoning, and I'll see if I can't make this a little bigger for you.
Yeah, hi. So it appears that the rail corridor itself is zoned as ag, but to the east of the rail corridor is zoned as Old Town, which probably similar to a downtown zoning district. And then south of there, where the trailer court is, it was a compact residential. And then on the west side of the rail corridor, it was a version of a residential zoning area. So there are different setback requirements within each area. Assuming it's not a principal structure, because there's no residential allowed in the rail corridor, the zoning setbacks would be 5 feet on the back lines and 5 feet on the sidelines. So pretty minimal setback requirements, and that applies for all of those zoning classifications. We bring up the zoning because I suspect as we go to sell this, the city of Horace would want to rezone it into one of those neighboring classifications.
Any questions for Eric or Jody so far? Anything else, Jody?
Does it work out to go ahead and, can you approach it to rezone it then sell it, or normally you sell it and they
Can you
have to rezone?
repeat that? I apologize.
For the property that is up there on that exhibit, is it better to go ahead and rezone it and then sell it, or you sell it and then rezone it?
I suppose we could do either approach. I mean, that's really, what we proposed was to put a letter out to all these neighboring property owners, right? First you go to your member entity, then BNSF has said they don't want anything back. So we can essentially skip that step for the rail corridor portion. But then you go to your neighboring property owners at a price that would be approved by this committee, the Cass County Joint, and then the MFDA tomorrow. The other option is, and I kind of talked with Commissioner Sherling about this, it's not been favorable to this committee to make an exception to the excess lands policy, but I certainly honor the fact that the excess lands policy did not contemplate buying a railroad. And so this is one of those unique circumstances where what we could do is lob this portion off, the B and the A, and put that out for public sale. That would take an exception because we'd be skipping right to that public sale. Then we could put an RFP out for somebody, one, to either sell that for us, and or we already have PIFers under a contract with a 6% payout for whatever they sold it for, so they could also manage this for us. That might be my recommendation at this point, just because again, you're getting into a lot of different zoning, you're getting into a lot of different price differentials on this. The only thing that the deed restriction requires is that no residential is placed on this. And so again, and it's really, there's a lot of different variables that would be up to the city of Horace about rezoning this and getting something different in there. So again, this is the Horace Fire Department. They have expressed interest in purchasing this red portion. They currently are under a lease with us for $200 a year. They just use it for parking. They would like to purchase it. Now, whether they want to purchase it at $8 a square foot, I'm not convinced of that, but maybe they would. I haven't approached them about it. But so these are all kind of options that sit out there, but just due to the complexities and the unique nature that this is a development property, and some of ours is more for rural residential. We have some sitting right off 100th Avenue that is asset land right now that could be developed, but in speaking with Nathan, it's going to be more industrial down there. But this is a unique circumstance that I think that we're looking for this committee to give us guidance on how you'd like us to take the next step.
When we developed the excess lands policy, there was a lot of conversations about the intent. And there was a lot of focus on farmland and making sure that the integrity of the land still remained, if it was ag land, it still remained ag land, that it wasn't going to become a sliver of a little hunting spot for somebody from town to go out and potentially disrupt an operation that's already existing. So it made great sense to sell it to whoever was in the neighborhood, if you will. This is a completely different situation. You know, we have spent a tremendous number of amount of money on properties, and now we are holding on to a property that maybe it sounded like we spent a lot from a few years ago, but this is the fastest growing community in North Dakota right now. It's going to be well flood protected. Since we started on this, we've got a high school there, we got elementary school going in there. You know, there's absolutely no reason for the Diversion Authority to basically give this land away to neighbors. It needs to be done very thoughtfully. You know, and as you said, what is it worth? It's worth what somebody's willing to pay for it right now, and we don't know what that number is unless it goes to public sale. Or if it goes to a commercial realtor or someone that will be able to give us an accurate estimate of value and market it that way. And I would suggest that we also, you know, look at what the city of Horace might have in mind for that property as well. You know, I appreciate the fact that whoever owns the trailer court there would perhaps like to expand for more parking or whatever it is. But is that really going to stay there, or is he at some point going to turn around and sell that land and whatever else he could possibly buy as a neighbor and profit from that? So I just think we really need to be mindful. This is a very, very special situation that I think deserves a lot of care. And auction to me at this point seems like a good way to go. Yes.
I just have two quick questions. So the two parcels on the south side of Center Avenue, what's the size of them and what's the width of those two parcels where they touch Center Avenue?
Are you talking about the yellow and the
Those,
red?
yes, correct.
Those are 200 feet across. They're essentially two corridors.
And what's the acreage of them?
So you're looking just for the red and the yellow, you're looking at 2.31 acres.
So I guess I would echo Commissioner Sherling's comments then that these are valuable parcels that we should try to auction or commercially list for sale.
And if I had that fire hall right there, that is not the highest and best use, is not a fire hall. But boy, if I could buy that extra land next to it for a parking lot and then turn around and sell the whole thing and build myself a brand new fire hall someplace else that might be better located, that would be a good option. So no, I just don't think that we need to be funding other people's goals here.
So one other time we've made an exception to the excess lands policy, if you recall, it was for organic land farmers. And it was right after I started, so it's been a couple of years now. So what I can do is take this back and draft the exception, and then I can bring the exception back at the next lands committee meeting, and kind of depending on how many whack-a-moles we have to do in the next couple of weeks, it might be next month or it might be August before we get this back. But then the cadence for those of you who are newer on the committee is we would bring it back here with this recommendation, we take it to Cass County Joint, and then ultimately, because this is a policy, the MFDA board will have to approve the policy exception. So it is possible, and it's certainly something that we can do. And then I'll probably work with Nathan a little bit. I know the city has used the RFP process on some parcels in town, and it seemed to have worked well. So I'll just try to mirror kind of what has already been successful for the project. So.
And the value of this property is only going up. So it's not a fire sale. you know, I wouldn't mind having my 401K parked on that property right now, so. Just saying. Any other questions or comments on this?
I'm just
Do
looking
you
at.
need a motion?
That's what I was looking at, John, real quick. John, do I need a motion to direct me? Yeah, he's saying we do to create, the motion would be a recommendation to create an exception to the excess lands policy for, it would be 7234A and 7234B.
Thank you. Is there someone that would like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Brenda. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Barlett. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? All in, roll call on this one, please.
Mrs. Sherling,
Yes.
Mr. Stamnes, Ms. Derrick,
Yes.
Mr. Borboom,
Yes.
Mr. Olson,
Yes.
Ms. Majo,
Yes.
Ms. Preston,
Yes.
Mr. Zimmerman.
Yes.
And that is everyone.
Thank you. On to item number 6, the RIMP loan guidance. Jody, again.
Again, I'm not quite as fast as Peggy on the fly here. Let me get down to the next item. So the RIMP loan guidance is coming before you today because we do have a property owner who has approached us in being able to utilize the RIMP loan in a manner in which we have not exercised it before. So understand that the RIMP loan was approved by the board, the MFDA board, and the finance committee approves the financing for the RIMP loan. So we've gone back twice and asked for additional funding. If you read through here, you can see we have several million left. We do still feel that that's adequate to meet the current needs that we're aware of for meeting the RIMP loan. It is outlined in the PRAM, if you've ever gone through that lovely document. It's also in section 25 of our settlement agreement. So I gave you just a snapshot of the guidance here. I do have the full RIMP loan here, the guidance document, if you'd like for me to pull it up, but it's approximately 27 pages long. So it's not a fun, light read, I can guarantee you that much. But we do want to talk to you today a little bit about I don't even want to call it a variance, maybe just a different usage that's been proposed to the Cass County Joint Board for approval. And we did have a discussion at the last Cass County Joint Board meeting. They would like the guidance from this committee to ensure that how they have been proposed to use the RIMP loan is still within the spirit of the RIMP loan. So we do have a property owner. My understanding is the property owner, there's 2 property owners that they have both retired, but previously were active farmers. They lease this property out to a tenant, and the tenant does need this property in the capacity that it provides to meet their farming operations. We are displacing both the property owners, both the tenant and this property owner. The tenant has almost rebuilt. They're almost completely moved off their current site and moved onto their new site. This property owner is proposing that they receive a RIMP loan. Essentially, they'll split that RIMP loan into 2 buckets. One would be to meet the storage needs that they currently have because they work as a farmhand and they'll go out and help other local farmers and their needs. So they have a need to continue to have that storage for their personal farm equipment. So they'd use a portion of the RIMP loan for that. And then they would use a portion of the RIMP loan to purchase land from their tenant. And then that way they could attach the loan to a mortgage, which is what the RIMP guidance requires. And then they would build additional storage on that land. And then in several years from now, they would transfer that loan to the tenant. And that transfer is permissible under the current guidance document. I think some of the concerns that were expressed was that this wasn't necessarily intended for the tenant, it was intended for the original farm operator. And so by splitting it and continuing with it and having part of it go to the original property owner and part of it going to the tenant, is this still the spirit of the RIMP loan? Is this still permissible under what your understanding of the RIMP loan was? Again, I'm staring at Eric to see if I missed anything. It's a little bit of a complicated scenario. I know that, you know, our chairman of Cass County Joint is here. He's part of those conversations. He can add. And then we do have 2 other members of the Cass County Joint Board meeting here with us to answer questions or express concerns. Just for the record, we did post this meeting as a Cass County Joint Board meeting in anticipation that we would have a quorum of that board present here,
So when I read through the policy, it's pretty specific that it's not for tenants. It's for the active producer to be able to maintain his livelihood. And and it's a very, very generous, I mean, it's not a loan, it's a grant. It's completely forgiven after 10 years. So this is a big deal. We're giving away millions of dollars here. And, you know, I guess I question why we would change a policy. It sounds to me like it's an attempt to manipulate the policy for personal gain. That's what it sounds like to me, but I'm not working with it actively, so I would like to hear from the members of the joint board. But before we do that, I guess I'd like to know from Commissioner Monjo, have you been using that on the Minnesota side, and what has that been working or not? I'm seeing shakings of heads.
Sorry, Commissioner Manager, we have not yet. So we do have a couple of them that we're negotiating with right now. We have actually a meeting tomorrow at 4:15, so I'll be leaving the board meeting a little bit early to continue those conversations with property owners who are on the Minnesota side. So the MCC JPA has not approved a RIMP loan yet, but we're poising some property owners to bring forward to them, so.
And wouldn't it be correct to say that there have been other producers that went ahead and retired then and did not get a RIMP loan, and they moved on?
So Commissioner Sherling, that's correct. And so we tried to estimate at the beginning of our negotiation process who would be eligible. Then they have to fill out a pre-approval form. We look through that pre-approval form. We bring it to Cass County Joint. The Joint Board approves that before we fill out the whole application, because we have one of our land agents that prepares a loan report. And that's fairly laborious. That takes us 3 to 4 months to complete that. We typically require that the property owner get bids. We go out to the vendors and get particular bids. We just don't want to go through that process if the board's going to say this isn't eligible. So what would happen is they would come forward, they say, we know we're eligible. We would pre-approve them for their eligibility, and then they would make the determination that they were no longer interested in farming, and they kind of wanted to step out of it, retire, whatever their personal reasons were. And if, let's make this up, let's say they were eligible for $1 million. In their settlement, then we would take a consideration of a portion of that RIMP loan as a cash payout, because we knew our liability was going to be $1 million. We would kind of back into that and say, okay, we'll give you a percentage of that $1 million as a cash payout, because that reduces our overall liability as a project and the payout. Because under all circumstances, they could have built another farmstead, held on to it for a certain number of years, and then sold that farmstead and transferred that loan. And so to kind of mitigate paying out unnecessarily, we did negotiate with them on that piece of it. So there are probably half a dozen at most. I can think of 4 off the top of my head, but there could be a couple others I'm not thinking of right now that were eligible and did not take the RIMP loan because they were retiring.
Any other questions for Jody at this point? Otherwise, I'd ask Manager Olson if you would like to speak to this issue, and then I'll have Manager Steen visit about it as well.
Certainly, the joint board had a concern because this was outside of the box. And we weren't going to make that decision, decided to pass that on to the land committee and have a discussion here to see what the appetite was to, tweak the rules to make this work. And there has been there has been farmers that have retired and have not taken it and would have qualified, and no different than here. And certainly if you go back and they had this option, they might have taken it and taken the RIMP transferred it or sold those rights to the operator of their land and taken the cash out of that. So certainly to do it now, I think the joint board just talked about that, and I don't think it's necessarily the right move at this point.
Okay, Manager Steen.
Thank you, Commissioner Sherling. So just kind of a little history. This came to the joint board one time, a couple of months ago, and
March.
the joint board sent it back. So this isn't right. The deal, and that was proposed, and same parties involved. I think 2 months later, a month later, I don't know the exact time frame. Similar deal came back repackaged. You know, I use that term because that's what it is. It's the packaging of the buyout. And a number of us on the joint board felt uncomfortable with a couple of things. One, does this fit? Commissioner Sherling pointed out the questions. Manager Olson talked about some of the questions we had as well. And so I was on a different wavelength, perhaps, than the rest of my managers on the joint board. I'm looking at the finances of this thing. And anything that we're doing with regard to committing authority funds, spending authority funds as taxpayer funds. That's the way I look at it. We've got to get the deals done, obviously. And I'm going to try to not identify directly what we're talking about here, but small, relatively small acreage. We are paying very fair value. This is in zone 1, correct? Very fair value for the removal of the properties. We had that discussion. In addition, we're looking at a easement, flowage easement on this property at, and I'll just be very clear, the highest I've ever seen on a per acre basis on this property, and this RIMP loan, and the details somewhat discussed here. So I got to sit back, I took a step back and say, what are we spending to get the flowage easement on this piece of property? I understand we're buying the buildings, and we've had, again, fair discussion. Everyone feels that the amount we're paying for the buildings themselves is a fair value. So then I sat back and said, what do people think, I say people, you people, us, what a fair value for a flowage easement would be on this property? And I'm going to ask Jody, what do we typically pay for flowage easement on a piece of property? Good, let's say it's excellent property in the valley, good farmland, what do we normally pay
Well,
per acre?
on this one,
No, not this one. On property like this, so we generally pay for a flowage easement.
currently, we're going to be paying 3,000 to 4,000 an acre.
3,000 to 4,000 per acre for a flowage easement.
Currently.
Right.
Because what you're going to, just for the rest of you who aren't as kind of in the weeds, Rick and I've had quite a few conversations about this, is you take the current value unencumbered, so without the flowage easement on it, and then you have to subtract kind of what it could sell at market value. So typically what you're seeing is current value around 10,000 an acre, and then they could sell it with it encumbered at 7,000. So we have to pay that differential. And there's a lot of variables that come into play with this, but just at the highest level, that's why you get that 3,000 number, because we have to pay them for the loss of the development rights, and then we need to pay them for how we're storing the water on their land, so the depth and the duration, and so that number shifts parcel by parcel. So, but overall, you're seeing that. So,
Thank you.
and that's for farmland. I should also put it out there. That would be for tillable land.
Yep. So we've got land that actually contains buildings, and I'm not sure how much of the acreage is tillable, what percentage, but it's a significant portion has building operations on.
Yeah, most of this, there's not quite as much of this is tillable because it's a farmstead site. And so it's, they're using most of the 20 acres that we're discussing as a farmstead site versus being tillable acres, so.
And I feel like I'm dragging the lands group into the weeds here, but I am, so that's on purpose. Anyway, so we've got this deal. And the other piece, we're not required to offer RIMP. It's an option for us to get the deal done. So it's not a requirement for any deal we do. So, and I'm going to throw some numbers out there, rounded examples, I'll say that way. Based upon the information provided to the joint board, we were paying in the area of 20,000 an acre for easement. That's the numbers that you've provided to us. If I can share that with you if you'd like.
Yeah, I hesitate only because we're in the middle of settlement negotiations.
Yes,
so
I understand. I
hesitate,
asked
yeah.
Sean if we could talk about this, and he said in generalities, yes.
Okay,
I cleared it with our attorney on this one. In addition to that, there is the RIMP loan. I don't want to get into details of that, but when you take the RIMP loan, which is for reestablishment of some property, I think outside actually of the flow easement area, right? Outside of the mitigation zone?
it would be definitively outside of Zone 1. We do have one property owner who had property in another flowage easement zone. They just had to build it up. And so we provided them with some site improvements, and so they can build that farmstead up. And so it's not in Zone 1. I think it's in Zone 3.
3, I think, yeah. 3, I think.
None of them are, even the Nipstads?
Well, they're putting buildings up on some of the properties, all outside of the mitigation zone,
Yeah, all the structures need to be removed from Zone 1,
right?
unless they got a map out.
So anyway, so the other piece that, and I'm not going to use real numbers, but if you were combining, and I'm being very, very conservative here, combine the RIMP loan with the flowage easement, we are talking well in excess of $50,000 an acre for an easement on this property. That's where a couple of us had a serious heartburn with what are we doing? Is the RIMP loan the right place for this? Is the amount the right amount? And there's no real guidance on this because it came in earlier, a much larger number, then there's a smaller number. And so that's the biggest reason. One of our members said, I think we should send this back to the Lands Committee to evaluate what we're doing here because the joint board has been given the authority to approve these deals brought to it. And I think I'm sitting on the joint board, I'm thinking it might fit policy, kind of gray, we all talked about that, it's kind of spirit, but it's not in the writing, spirit of the policy, but does it fit logic? You know, are we doing the right thing for the taxpayers in this case? That's why I'm here. So thank you for allowing me to
You're
speak.
welcome. I appreciate you being here and getting into the weeds a little bit with us because I think it's important for us to know how our policies are working out in the rural areas. One of the things I'm recalling is that the DA board approved a finite fund for this, and I want to say it's 20 million. Is that correct? Does anybody know? I mean, it
That
doesn't
is
really-
correct. And so
Okay.
we did go back some time ago
So,
and
you
had
know,
it.
if we open up this policy anymore, and I will say the DA board did not do that lightly. I mean, it was pretty controversial at the time. If we open this up even further, are there going to be enough funds for those that truly need it? Because I recall the conversations about the old grain bin that was perfectly workable, but now they were going to have to tear it down and they weren't going to get enough money to buy a new one and they can't drag the old one. So, I mean, there was a purpose behind this, but it wasn't to get rich off the taxpayers. And there's a limit. There's a limit to our budget. And I just think we need, just like the excess lands policy, we need to look at the intent. Those of us that were there when these policies were put together, some of us won't be around in the future to remind everybody what those policies are. So I'm counting on all the staff and, well, Rick, you'll still be around for a while. So, but anyway, that's my 2 cents, is I think we need to stick to the spirit of what we put forth in the first place, and just that we have a budget that we've been allotted as well.
Could you scroll back to the, well, it explained what the RIMP loan was.
Yeah, so this I did put in here.
So
This is from the settlement agreement, and this is in our guidance document, just to remind everybody, kind of, to me, when we talk about the spirit of this program, I go back to the settlement document and the preamble, which were created well before my time here. I wasn't here when a lot of things started, but I was here when the guidance document, the second version of the guidance document, was created. When I first started, there was one that had already been drafted, and we went through and continued to refine this. So
there was a statement, and I don't see it. You're not on the first, it said something about successors.
Yeah,
or-
it's there.
Or assigned, okay, and.
It's down further,
assigns
right in there.
And assigns.
the recipient, heirs, successors, or assigns
Right,
do not stay in
or
operation.
Or assigns. Now, tell me what that means. Mary, you were,
Well, I
Part of
think,
that,
you know,
what-
what we do,
Well, and so is
Eric.
Eric.
and John,
and
I think
Don.
everybody's pointing fingers behind us right now. Nobody wants to come
Well,
up, but
yeah,
I do have a recollection of what that might mean.
well, and we do have a couple of, we have a couple of loans that are out there that have gone to the parents, shall we say,
the what?
the parents.
Oh, okay.
And at some point in time, those parents may want to retire, and they can assign this loan to their heirs. They can, to their children who are still going to be operating the farmstead, and that's fairly commonplace. And so the loan was certainly set up that if the parents wanted to take a step back and have the children run the operations, they can do that. There is the ability within the guidance document to transfer the loan to somebody who will continue the active farm operations. To me, the intention was that we would, there's a couple of reasons, and I got 2 people up the queue over here who can kick me if I'm saying anything wrong, was, you know, the Uniform Relocation Act was created decades ago. And that's a federal obligation that we have to meet with the property owners to relocate them out of the zone and get them out of there. It was primarily built for a metropolis area, and that goes back decades, when typically a new highway would go through a low-income area, and there would be probably more impact on, you know, those who are lower economic and socioeconomically impacted people. And that was done intentionally because they wouldn't have the wherewithal to be able to fight against any project. And so the Uniform Relocation Act has quite a bit of history, but again, it was primarily done for a city area. This is unusual that you would have such a significant impact in a rural community. I mean, we're impacting hundreds of structures and hundreds of family members. So this program was adopted out of something that was created in Minnesota to kind of fill that gap, because if they were in town, there would be this gap would already kind of be filled up. So this was modeled after something else that has already been out there, and it was to help the farmers, right? I mean, sure, your grain bin's 50 years old, and sure, it's depreciated in value completely, right? It's not worth that much, but it still works, right? You don't need to spend $50,000 or $100,000 to build a new grain bin. But when we come in and we do our appraisals and we offer you amount for your structure, we're offering you the depreciated value. So we're offering you $20,000 on something that's going to cost you $100,000 to rebuild. So that's what this RIMP loan was created for, because we don't pay replacement costs new, we pay the market value of what it is at today. And this RIMP loan is to bridge that gap for all of our producers out there who need it, because let's just say what it is, they don't want to move, they don't want to relocate. this project is forcing them to relocate. So the RIMP loan was created to help us get them relocated somewhere else. So we go, like I said, through this laborious process where we get all these quotes in place. And we say, well, you can store this many bushels today. We'll pay to replace that many bushels in the future. If you want more than that, you're on your own. So we go through a pretty lengthy process of depreciation, looking at the current footprint, what will the new footprint be, and prorating sometimes the buildings or the structures, because you might want something bigger, which would be more efficient for your operations than what we would get for you today. And so really, to me, the spirit and the genesis of this is to replace those farming operations in the community. So with this one, that's where you kind of get a little bit touchy, right? Because we do have a farmer out there, he just happens to be a tenant, and he is using this operations so that he can continue his farmer operations. This tenant already has a RIMP loan from us, just so you know. They've almost fully expended that RIMP loan, building out their operations. He just happened in their business model to go and lease space from other farmers instead of building a larger capacity farmstead. So again, just a very unique circumstance, kind of all around for them. They do have to spend it to get it. They just don't get the cash payout for this RIMP loan. So they do have to give us invoices. We do have to approve those invoices. It goes to the land agent, then Eric reviews them, then it comes to me. So we can say, hey, it's a permissible expense of the RIMP loan. So you have to spend it to get it, goes into an escrow account, and we'll hold it in there for, I think it's 3 years after the date of approval for you to expend it. Any unspent funds then at that time come back to the MFDA. So what we count as, and the other one you saw, we had I think it was 7.7 million left. Those are unobligated funds. Doesn't mean we've actually spent all that, but those are unobligated funds, because we have to assume everybody's going to spend whatever we've kind of granted them in the loan process. So I'll hand it over to Mr. Shockley or Mr. Dodds if they have anything to add.
Certainly, Madam Chair, members of the Lands Committee. I was drafted Section 26.01 of the settlement agreement. The RIMP program was intended, one of the issues that was presented by the upstream was not wanting to create essentially an economic dead zone within the UMA. And as a result, they wanted to continue active farm operations or rural businesses. And so the recipient was intended to be an active farming operation, such as a family or a business that was actively farming, and it would be conducted in accordance with the rules of the program. The intent was that, using the grain bin example, that a 6,000 bushel grain bin may still be functional on the existing farmstead, but to rebuild it, nobody would rebuild a 6,000 bushel grain bin because it would be functionally obsolete. And so it was intended to be a forgivable loan to allow them to rebuild a similar operation outside of the UMA. The reason that the word recipients, heirs, successors, and assigns is included is that the program has a tail to it, meaning that if they cease operations, they're required to repay the loan unless it's been fully forgiven. And so that makes it enforceable against their assigns. So if they sell the farmstead 2 or 3 years later, the assigns would carry on that obligation. Or if there was an unfortunate situation of a foreclosure by a bank, that the bank would be obligated to follow the terms and conditions of that loan. Or if there's a death, it would transfer to the heirs. The primary consideration in this program is to look at whether or not the recipient qualifies as an active farm operation. And if you look in the definitions of the settlement agreement, active farm operations, we referenced the United States Department of Agriculture FSA office, as they have requirements for what an active farming operation is. And we had identified some of the businesses that were within the UMA. Eric can offer some of the policy history behind the RIMP loan.
Yeah, thanks, John. The other thing I might add there is you'll notice there's a definition for an active farm operations. As John noted, that's really somebody that's actively farming as registered by the FSA. There's also a definition for a business, this loan program. In fact, the first 3 loans that we offered were for businesses that were displaced in the channel. As Jody mentioned earlier, the Relocation Act provides this sort of gap coverage for residential relocations, but not for business or farm relocations. And so that was kind of the genesis of the RIMP program. And so because of that, both farms and businesses, rural businesses, were eligible. And so in the situation that we're discussing here today, I think it's clear the owner of the property is not actively farming. He helps out on the side, but he's not actively farming himself, but he certainly has a business where he's renting his farmland, he's renting his facilities that are being used for farm purposes. And so it's a little bit of a question where he has a business. It's not himself actively farming. But so for those reasons, I guess that's probably one of the considerations where the consideration in this situation, we felt he was eligible.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions for either Eric or John? Any discussion?
Just a
Mr. Steen.
quick question. So what's to prevent a person who owns land with some buildings on it, don't care how run down they are, to say, I'm renting this to somebody, and you want to clear my land, and I need to rebuild these buildings, brand new, to this, my son or my partner who's renting this land from me, so they can continue to rent, and I can build this brand-new building for them under the RIMP loan program, so long as they continue to farm it. That's a good deal. So what prevents that from happening?
Sorry, Eric, here, back behind you, Eric. If you scroll down a page or so, a page and a half maybe, there is some eligibility criteria. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe it's more than a page or 2. There you go, right there. So one of the other key criteria for eligibility is that there can't be available replacement properties for them to relocate into. And so if somebody just simply has a pole barn and they're using it to store toys or equipment or whatever, that we would consider. There's all sorts of pole barns and storage facilities in the metro area, but there are not active farmsteads available for people to buy or move into. And so that's one of those qualifying, and we're very particular as we are crafting this and working through this guidance as to what would qualify and what's not, and that's been a clear marker as we've evaluated those.
So we have brought 2 pre-approval forms that I can think of off the top of my head to Cass County Joint with the recommendation to deny the RIMP loan. And the board has supported our efforts in that. So we do sometimes get requests for loans. We'll look through it. The example that Eric just used is very specific, and that did come forward, and we did make the recommendation that the Cass County Joint deny that pre-approval form. And then we went back to the property owner and said, you're not eligible for a RIMP loan for the reasons that Eric just laid out before you right now, so.
So what stops anybody from, it sounds to me like in this case, they're just trying to expand their operation, project expense.
In this situation, the tenant has demonstrated, and you know, we've got some evidence that he has been renting the space on the owner's land. And so there is evidence that he has been using those facilities as part of his farm operation.
But the DA has no obligation to tenants.
We do not.
I mean, it's great to write out checks to folks, but that's not our obligation. Our obligation is to landowners. That's my opinion, but thank you. Any other questions for any of the staff here? Or any discussion?
If I could seek clarification.
Pardon me?
If I could seek
Please.
clarification from the committee. No, just the
Oh,
direction
yes.
what the committee would be providing us to take back to the Cass County Joint Board and to the property owner regarding the appetite for the current proposal, which is to receive a RIMP loan and to utilize that RIMP loan to build storage buildings in one area so that they can store their farm equipment, and then to use a portion of the RIMP loan to buy land and build storage on the tenant's property with the intention to transfer the loan to the tenant in future years. So that's the current proposal that is on the table, and just kind of looking for a summary from the Lands Committee on, whether or not you feel that's still within the spirit of the project or it's not within the spirit of the project, so that we can just take that back and continue discussions with the property owner.
And so how is transferring the loan to a tenant even within these guidelines?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily to the tenant. I mean, there's the provision that you could transfer this to someone else because it's a 10-year agreement. So I'll pick on Roger. Let's say Roger here got a loan and something happened to his health, and he decided in 5 years he could no longer actively farm, but he wanted to sell his farm operations to someone else. He could do that, and then he would transfer that loan
Right.
with the sale of the farm
But
operations.
he'd be selling it.
Yes.
He wouldn't be keeping the land and the RIMP loan, which is, let's quit calling it a loan, the grant, and then rent out his property.
Say that again. I'm tracking you.
He'd still be renting out his property.
Or he can sell it. We can transfer the loan.
Right, if he sold it. But that's not what's happening here.
What would be happening here is the property owner would be purchasing land from the tenant. So think of a big parcel and think of a postage stamp in the middle of that. And he would purchase that postage stamp. He would build, let's say he's going to build grain bins out there. He would build those grain bins out there. He would hold on to it, rent it back to the tenant because he owns that land now. And in a couple of years, the intention is he would then sell that land and the grain bins to the tenant, and the loan would be transferred at that time.
In my opinion, that is not in keeping with the spirit of what we're trying to do for landowners. I feel like I'm being manipulated. That's how it feels to me. I mean, we've been very, very generous in trying to keep people whole. And if somebody's sitting up at night thinking of ways they can manipulate the system by way of the taxpayers, I find that highly annoying, because every time I sit in on a joint board meeting, wow, just wow. To Manager Steen's comment, it's a real eye-opener. So, and that doesn't even touch the settlement that Richland County is, send your kid to high school down there, folks, because they're getting grants, they're getting scholarships, it's all at taxpayer costs. So my feeling is no, but I would love to hear what the rest of the board thinks, and I need a motion to some effect.
Well, I'd like to make a comment.
Sure.
This RIMP, the RIMP program was set up a while ago, quite a few years ago, and it's been going along, and active farmers have taken advantage of it, or not, I don't mean they've taken advantage, but they've
Which they
used
should.
it. They've used it in appropriate manner, and I do take exception to Rick's comments on the cost now. I mean, there's nothing we can do about the cost now. If somebody qualifies for this RIMP loan, yeah, it's a lot more expense. And if you're going to put it on the size of the farmstead and the buildings that are there, and then you pile on the RIMP. But that's what we did when we made the policy, when we set this up. So we can't now sit here and say, well, it's too expensive. I'm not talking about this specific situation. But as I look at the wording, and I know that we talked about a renter when we put this together, that if the farmer retired, what would happen? And if you look at the wording, it says survivors or successors, heirs,
Or assigns.
or assigns. Now, what could you put in, what word would you put in there instead? Assigns. Would that be others? Would that be an active farmer? So, you know, I'm sitting here with mixed emotions, but when I read that document, it seems like what their request fits. Because they're being upfront about what they want to do, that's where our heartburn is, because we know what they're going to do. If the farmer came and he was retired and he told the same story, but he didn't say anything about his renter taking the assignment of the loan, of the RIMF loan, 5 years down the road, we probably would look at this differently. But because we know what the purpose is and what the outcome is going to be, I think that's where our heartburn is. At least that's what I'm reading. And I understand the cost. Yeah, but again, we went through that when we set this program up. And there's been additions, dollar additions made to, I think 3 different times, maybe even 4 times. It's ballooned up to 20 million from 5 initially. Yeah, it's costly, but I think it was set up to, like Jody said, and like Eric said, to replace items that you couldn't move, and it wouldn't make any sense to build 6,000 bushel bins, but it makes a lot of sense to build one 30,000 bushel bin. And the cost of that, and they both serve the same, used for the same reason, but you know, it just didn't make any sense to build 6. So anyway, yeah, I have mixed emotions about this. I understand the cost, and I understand the purpose, and I understand the purpose of the document of the RIMF loan. I understand that. And I think the big, and Rick has said, you know, the big heartburn for the Cass County Joint Board was, you know, this seems like it's outside the box. And is it using the system? I don't know. Maybe we got to look at that, and maybe we have to have legal. John, maybe you can help us here. What is that? What is heirs and successors and assigns? What does that assigns mean? Help me through this.
Certainly. The word assigns means that you look primarily at who the first recipient is. It's either a business or a farming operation. So that's your first question. An assign would be somebody that, we'll use a farming operation as the first example. A farmer is actively farming. He or she qualifies for that, and 2 years later sells it to a younger farmer because they want to retire. The point of the program is that the assigner would take on the responsibility for the loan forgiveness, and also to continue in business for 10 years. Because if they don't complete that requirement, they're required to pay it back. There are also potential tax implications associated with the loan. And so the assignee is from the original farmer to the person that's continuing the active operation. With respect to the business, it's the same thing. Does the original business meet the conditions of the policy? And then if the business in a year or two sells to another person, or the bank takes it over, or some situation like that, it's the assigner is the entity that's assigned the loan. A good example is, at a very personal level, is that sometimes people will purchase homes or lake properties initially in their name, and then they'll assign it to a family LLC that owns the lake home together. The LLC that owns the lake home is the assignee. So hopefully that helps to explain it.
So it's not really a reason to use the RIMF loan, it's a reason, or what would happen if, to the assignment of the loan, if the farmer quits farming,
Right.
and where that would go.
Right. Assignee is a legal term for the subsequent legal owner of the property or the subsequent obligated party to a contract. Another good example, use West Argo as an example, a construction company bought out another construction company and they want to take over the existing contracts of the first construction company. The second construction company is the assignee of all of those contractual obligations. It's a legal term essentially meaning the second person that's assigned all the rights and obligations under the contractual documents.
So what I'm hearing is that, you know, the RIMP loan has worked.
Yeah.
And we have some guardrails here, and we're trying to interpret what those guardrails are going to do for us. And perhaps we need John to go back and tighten those up a little bit to give you better future guidance and guidance with this as well, so that we do stick to the spirit of it. Just a thought, I mean, because otherwise we're going to circle back here a year from now with another problem. I just wonder if that policy needs to reflect or maybe go into detail a little bit more about what the intention of this board is.
Really, you would tell us, and we would write it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a guidance document, right, that we created, kind of went through the labyrinth of people to get it to where it's at. There were a lot of reviews that went into this. And the guidance, the premise of the guidance document was built off of this, what was in the settlement agreement and what was approved by the permitting agencies in the PRAM, right? And so this is what we have to go off of. Other than that, you know, we came up with these, we'll call them guardrails about what is permissible. I'll pick on Eric, if Eric and I take a step back, I mean, what this property owner is asking for is permissible under the guidance document, because at the end of the day, as Manager Olson pointed out, let's say we have 24 RIMP loans that eventually get approved. There is no way for us to predict what's going to happen in every producer's life, not over the course of 10 years, but we're approving them over the course of 5 or 6 years. So now you're looking at a program that's going to, say, last 15 to 20 years. We cannot predict what's going to happen in everybody's lives and their ability to continue to actively farm or actively manage that business, which is why this has been allowed to be transferred to somebody else. So it's still, we're still going to leave the money in active farming. And so that's my understanding of this program. Are the funds that are being requested so active farming can still be happening within our community? Or are the intention of the funds to be used for something else? And that's where what we didn't want to do is approve a RIMP loan for $1 million. They say, thank you so much, I'll take my $1 million to Arizona. The intention was to leave that here and to some extent leave that tax base here, right? I mean, you want an active farmer here, you want that tax base to be here. I can say in this particular circumstance, the producer has accepted the appraised value of the flowage easement and the appraised value of the structures. They are also eligible for approximately $500,000 more in RIMP loan than they are going to settle for because they recognize they don't need it. So they're eligible for one amount. They're like, don't even write up the offer for me for that. I don't need it to reproduce what I need to produce. So I don't feel like in this particular circumstance, they're trying to squeeze blood out of a turnip and get more money from us. Not to say that doesn't ever happen in my job, but not in this circumstance. To me, the uniqueness of the circumstance is a couple-fold. What we typically don't see is them taking a portion of the loan and building over here, and a portion of the loan and building over here. That's actually unusual as well. Typically, when you build out a farmstead, you're building it out on one postage stamp in a parcel. So that is one very unique nature of this. And so, you know, that is something to perhaps consider as well. We'd probably think Mr. Barthel suggested this to me, is we actually issue 2 RIMP loans. So if one is essentially assigned or sold off, that we can still track the other one. That would encumber the storage buildings for the farm equipment, which would be separate than this, or maybe not. Maybe they both would need to be assigned. We have approved 2 separate loans in the past for different producers because just of how their LLCs worked on their farmsteads now. It's an interesting error structure sometimes with these producers and how they'll be passing things along. So kind of working with legal to make sure there's always a mortgage to attach this loan to. So again, if you think that the spirit of the program or the guardrails of the guidance document should be different than what they've been set before you now, we would need direction on what you want us to do, because we've just used the settlement agreement and the PRAM to draft these with the understanding of, you know, attorneys who have more familiarity in property law and real estate than I do. So that's why we have, if you scroll through the entire guidance document, you'll see the escrow agreements and you'll see all these documents that have to be signed on. So
Commissioner Steen.
Thank you. Just
Manager Steen.
A couple of last comments from me. You talk about the spirit of this RIMP loan, and I know earlier, somewhere in this document, you talk about the original RIMP guidance contemplated, states 2 places where the displaced landlords must make reasonable efforts to accommodate displaced business tenants to be eligible for RIMP. You also state that the final guidance does not include that language. Some say, well, that's an oversight. Some say maybe it was intentional. Can't tell you what it is, but it was identified at one point and then deleted at another point. Could have been a reason for that. I don't know what that is. The spirit, I understand exactly what Roger's saying. I think there's a reason for this. And I wish I could go into more detail of the specifics because I can make a much better point, but I'll leave it at where I'm at. And Roger, you talked about cost. No, cost is a major factor for this program because you've had to go back to the board 2 or 3 times to get an adjustment to the amount allocated. There's so much, 20 million was total for the program, you know, and so if you got it, you better spend it, right? That's government work at its finest. We got to spend this money because we have 20 million to spend. I disagree with that because this isn't our money to spend. I go back to the taxpayers. Are we making the right deal for the authority and the right deal for the taxpayers? It's a great deal for the landowner. There's no question. Is it the right deal for the people who are paying for this? That's my last piece.
yeah, so just so you know, we have approved 13 loans for 12 qualifying businesses. That's because we split it out for one of them. We have obligated the 12.3. We have 7.7 remaining. Our estimate is that we have 5 million in qualifying RIMP loan sitting out there. That would include this particular property owner within that 5 million. So my understanding, again, before my time, so somebody can correct me if I was wrong, the first 5 million were there as a test if the program would work and if the property owners would want it. And then they went back and asked for some additional funding. I try to capture all that history up here. And then there was a concern about a year ago that we're going to get pretty tight on these RIMP loans. And they have been very helpful to settle cases. Instead of going to the courts and an argument happening in the courts about replacement costs new, these actually have been, I would say, very successful. We call them a tool in our toolbox to be able to settle up some of the settlement negotiations in eminent domain cases. So at this time, I don't anticipate, and with Commissioner Sherling, I would agree, I'd probably be beaten pretty heavily if I asked for additional funding. So it's probably not going to happen. So we are thoughtful. We have communicated with the property owners and the producers This is a first come, first serve. So if you have any intention of getting a RIMP loan, you should probably start working kind of within our process to ensure you're kind of in the queue to become eligible and that we have those funds available. So this time I don't anticipating needing more than the 20 million that has been obligated, but I'd hate to say for 100% certainty that we wouldn't have something come up. And that is, the reason we're okay is because we've had a handful of them. Like I said, I can think of 4 that were eligible that did not ask for the RIMP loan because they were retiring and kind of stepping away from the business, so.
And if the funds run out and you don't have this as a tool in the toolbox anymore, it'll just be called something else.
What will happen is in my understanding, because I think it was Manager Steen that noted, this is not an obligation necessarily. And so where we're at is, we're above 90% of filing on eminent domain cases. We're pretty significant. There are quite a few that were filed today in Wilkin County. We don't have that many remaining. We will continue to try to utilize this, like I said, as a tool to settle some cases. But once you get into that court process, the court is not going to say you have to give them a RIMP loan. The court will not say that. Court will say you need to pay them this amount, and that amount essentially could include something that would allow them more funds to rebuild, whether that would have been their contributory value, their RIMP loan, or just their appraised value. It's difficult to kind of to say we'll know that when that time comes. We just haven't gotten to that point yet.
So circling full back, we need a motion guidance from this group to go back to the joint board. If this is okay, I personally don't think it is. I don't think that this was the intention of how to use it. I think it feels like manipulation. We have extended these REMP loans in good faith, and I don't feel like this is how I intended to use it. That being said, I can't make the motion. And if somebody feels differently, I'd love to hear from you. But they need to know what to do here.
Just,
Mr. Olson.
I want to make sure that everyone knows that basically this is 2 separate locations. And the use of the building was for their own use, to store equipment that they have to use to help neighbors out. Is that?
That's my understanding. I've not spoken to the property owner directly, so.
And then the other is a storage bin or bins.
That is
storage
correct.
For grain storage at a different site.
That is correct.
Close to where the renter is, so he could hook up
Correct.
an auger across the top or whatever. So that's what the application is for, really, for 2 different,
That is correct.
yeah.
And so the motion that was drafted was to confirm that the RIMP program allows for loans to be transferable if the property owner sells the farmstead or rural business, and that RIMP funds can be utilized on more than one property, as Manager Olson pointed out, so long as the properties are owned by the mortgage holder and the mortgage is attached to the property where the RIMP funds are applied. So basically, the motion that's sitting before you would allow what the property owner is asking. If this committee is not comfortable with that, I just think we wouldn't have a motion to take back, and we would understand that guidance, and we would work with the property owner. So I don't know that I would need a separate motion other than this. I just would need either the motion to fail or for there not to be a second to the motion that's been provided, so.
And then I did have one more question for Eric, actually, and it was on the application for RIMP and whether they qualified. And I think under a farmer, you had to be recognized at the FSA office as a farmer. Do we know that for sure that they aren't? And sometimes sharecropping, you were considered, a farmer, so.
So Commissioner Olson, Manager Olson, my understanding is the owner has retired from farming, but whether or not he's still recognized by FSA, I'm not specifically sure about that. I tried to do a little bit of research on that and wasn't real successful, so.
That's all I.
Okay, Keith, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Not at this time. I always wondered about the tenant owner, if there was any formal type of agreements that would distinguish them other than just a farmer, renter, owner, or is there a business also relationship? And I don't have the answers.
Is there a motion? Brenda?
So since I'm new to this committee, if I'm hearing correctly, I just want to confirm, is all of the review by everyone is that this request follows the policy? The question becomes one, was that really the intent of what was looking at when it was originally written?
That's correct. So, and just to be clear, because John's back there, it's a guidance document.
Okay.
And the differing factor in that is a policy must be approved by the MFDA board, like the excess lands policy we discussed. So any modification or change to that would go up to the MFDA board for final stamp of approval. This is a guidance document, and so we can take your guidance and we can go back and redraft this document. It's kind of a living document in a sense. So, so little bit of a difference in that you know the policy has not been approved by the board, and you're correct. The question is, was this the intention? Does this fall in line with the spirit and intent of the program to utilize it this way?
Nathan?
So to my opinion here, it seems like the question really isn't whether it can be assigned or not. To me, it's whether it's really, is it a business or not? It's clear it's not a farm operation, meaning, you know, like Rogers farm operation, right? But is it a business? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves is this a business or not? And if it's a business, it should be eligible for this program.
If you want me to answer that, Eric, I do have documentation from their tax statements that do show a significant payment from the tenant to the renter. From the tenant to the, I apologize, to the tenant to the loaner. So to us, that demonstrates there's some form of business there because he's formally renting out the farmstead. And we do require that documentation in the pre-application form instead of you just saying, oh yeah, they write me a check on every Wednesday or whatever it is. We do require formal documentation. They were able to meet that threshold for us.
Manager Steen?
Since there's no motion on the floor, thank you, Chair. Just a thought here. You've got a policy. There's a big, huge question whether or not this tenant thing actually exists as a policy, or excuse me, guidance. You've got guidance. Thank you for correcting that, Jody. I would propose that it's questionable for a reason. It's not clear in here. This proposed motion, you will spend the 20 million in no time. Guaranteed. For the interpretation of this plan, I can transfer this loan and the land to, what does it say? And basically anybody, so long as they farm. And again, I don't think the intent was, I think Mary said this earlier, to make the business owner or the farmer whole, not to make them rich.
And I think if that's not clear, and it obviously isn't clear, my proposed direction would be to ask staff to tweak this guidance and bring it back. Mr. Zimmerman.
I thought I followed this at one point. Not
What's
sure I
that?
do. Not sure I follow it anymore. But the one question in my mind is I'm unclear about the relationship between the owner and the tenant and how that trickles down later and the potential financial implications of that. I think Commissioner Steen, Manager Steen, sorry, might have referenced this earlier, but tenant was in an earlier version of this and removed. And my guess is we've had this conversation before. And if there's any way to revive some of that conversation, I'd be interested in what that was. So if there's some research we could do, maybe.
I looked. I couldn't find it. It's a fair question, Manager Zinnerman. And I actually asked some of my peers if they could remember. The only thing that I could think of was we need to be very clear that this loan is attached to a mortgage. But we had drafts and red lines going back and forth, and I was looking for comments in there as to why the tenant language was dropped from the old document and not put into the new document. But try as I might, I could not recall specifically why that was pulled out. So,
Excuse me, I might just add, my recollection of that is similar to Jody's, but I might also just add that, again, the loan is given to the property owner, and we need to have a mortgage on the property that property owner owns. And so we are protected if they would ever default or whatever happens. We have a mortgage and promissory note and escrow agreement and all those protections. In some regards, the tenant or whatever that loan recipient does with the loan proceeds is somewhat irrelevant. And I'm sure you're going to challenge me about the spirit of things here, but as we were reviewing this guidance document, going back to the settlement agreement, where the guidance came from, the tenant situation, we recognize that there are tenants out there, but it became somewhat irrelevant as to what exactly that relationship is between the tenant and the business or property owner. They could choose to rent it to their daughter, son, brother, cousin, or operate the business themselves. I think at some point that became kind of an irrelevant point as we worked through those details. So I just share that from a perspective.
Roger.
You know, that's my memory too. The successor didn't necessarily have to be as long as the loan was attached. The successor to the operation did not have to be a relative in order for this to continue. I mean, it wasn't 5 years down the road and the operation changed. The original owner of the RIMF loan retired. What happens on the next day? The whole operation is needed by who's ever running that operation to continue to operate the original owner of the loan. So all of those assets then are actually part of the farm that the farmer is renting out and necessary to continue.
Well, but I don't think that this situation fits into that policy.
Not from a farmer, but we've also done 3 RIMF loans for businesses. And if you're going to look at the whole RIMF document, guidance document, maybe not here, but over here that would fit.
And then
there is evidence of significant rental income from this property. And it is significant, I've seen that. It isn't just, hey, we just paid the utility bills and $100 a month. It was a very significant amount. So it does prove that there's income coming off of these structures, whether it's the building or the bins. And if that wasn't there, hey, I agree 100%. There's no business here. But that documentation is available and they provided that to us.
The tenant is paying the utility bills, we have record of that, and the tenant is paying a significant amount to rent the properties from the property owner. And that was all in the pre-approval. And again, it's not spit in a handshake, it is a fair amount that's being paid on an annual basis, so
Here's a 1099 too.
that's correct.
Nathan?
The time period and how long that relationship's been in place?
Do you know? I just don't know that off the top of my head. I apologize.
Yeah, I think anecdotally several years, but I don't,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure of the details.
Okay. I mean, we've dedicated quite a bit of time. Thank goodness we didn't have a 3 o'clock meeting, which I usually advocate for. It's almost time for finance. Is there a motion? Is there a motion? Okay, then. I think,
I have my clear direction after an hour.
clear as mud, right?
No, it was
Okay,
good.
But yeah, all right, enough. Is there any other business?
I would just like to say thank you, because when I started, this meeting was essentially a report out. We would come forward and we would report out our activity and what we did. And today, I think this committee truly functioned as you were intended to function, which is to provide the lands team guidance when we get into circumstances like the rail corridor and like this RIMP loan, where we maybe don't have the clearest of direction. And so I know we've spent a lot of time in here today, but this is really why we have you kind of standing behind us and to support the entire lands team and to give us guidance when we need it and are asking for it, and sometimes when we're not asking for it. But I do appreciate all the conversation that you've given us today and the guidance that you provided. So,
Well, and I appreciate all the time and effort that went into these documents. Several years ago, we could not anticipate every bump in the road. But as we go along, when these things pop up, if there are ways that we could revise the language to make it more clear, I think that would be in everyone's best interest. So if there's no other business, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So
Second.
We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.